Welcome, everyone. We are here live at One Cardinal Way. The Cardinal Cowboy. I get to meet all kinds of fun, cool Cardinal fans, baseball fans, and historical experts. David, Kroese, welcome to the show here.
Thank you.
We are broadcasting live from your place right here. Is it, would you call this a condo, an apartment? What do they call it?
Apartment.
These are the apartments that most people are familiar with. Right here at One Cardinal Way, right across from Busch Stadium. You can see the stadium there. We decided to start the show off with the trophy in this position, but I'm almost like maybe we should move it out of the way so you can see that stadium a little more. But I bought my replica World Series trophy. You can see I'm here right after a Cardinal game. We're a couple hours after a game, and got to hang out a little bit at some of the local places where you always see me. And then David and I talked a few times about coming over here to talk about this, and we visited the other day and said, let's do a show here.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Carter. Yeah.
Well, David is an expert with Cardinal history as well, so that's where we want to talk about. He's got a book that he wrote. Show everybody your book here. We'll put that up for everybody to see a little bit, and I'll put the camera on you, and I'll have you talk a little bit about that.
So this is the book I wrote. It's about the experience of visiting all 400 plus National Park Service units. So, and actually I wore a Cardinals hat to all those, and as far as anybody knows, it's the only hat. There's only about 50 people or so that are known to have done all that, and only one hat is known to have visited or gone on somebody's head to all 400 plus units. So, and that's a Cardinals hat, a well-worn hat that you can see in the back of the book there.
Yeah, hold that up a little bit so people can see that part, because there it is. Sure. Yeah, on that side, there you go.
Yeah.
Very cool.
We had to retire that hat. It kind of saw its last days in American Samoa. One of those last parks that I finished up in.
Well, lots of fun that you bring to the table here. So we really wanted to spend a little time talking to you, because how often do you get to come up and watch the Cardinal game from right above the stadium over here, but you get to watch it every day.
Yeah, it's a great view. You know, actually, I sit on the balcony, I keep score. And I get a view of the whole field. Just a little bit of obstruction in the warning track, but you know, you don't miss a thing. And you have the TV playing the game here inside, so you know, you can see replays when you want to.
Well, I tell you, this is the dream location that a lot of people literally do dream of, and you just happen to be living the dream, as they say. So let's think a little bit about your background. That's kind of neat. You are actually in the Hall of Fame for Fantasy Cardinal camps, so, right? Tell me a little bit about that and what that means to you, and why you enjoyed doing 12 of those, right?
12 of those, yeah. It's been a wonderful experience. You get a chance to play and get to know a lot of former Cardinals, and including some Hall of Famers, and that's been a treasure over the years. Fantastic individuals. The Cardinals invite ex-players who enjoy interacting with the fans and the players, and we actually play games with the ex-players are on our teams, and so we interact with them on the diamond. The quality of the play isn't always exceptional, but it does give people like me an appreciation for how difficult it is to play the game of baseball. And especially when you see some of these retired players, you know, they're just a whole level above the average person when it comes to sports and baseball.
Well, like I said, so many people dream of actually playing real baseball, and then when you get the opportunity to play in a fantasy camp, you're playing with a lot of the old pro guys. Tell me some of the players that you've had the opportunity to play with that kind of made it really fun for you.
Well, it's been a great ride. A little Cardinal historical anecdote. The last team that Mike Matheny managed before he took the Cardinals job in 2012 was my fantasy camp team in January of that year.
Interesting. All right.
Over time, just the other day, I spent some time catching up with Ray Langford. And Brian Jordan is always a big hit. Ozzie Smith comes to the camps and is very gracious with his time. Class guy, as everybody who knows him would say. And you know, you really could list all of the Cardinals players. And you have these cool experiences, like one fantasy camp, we were sitting at dinner, one of these evening events, and Gary Bennett was sitting next to us, and he's wearing his 2006 World Championship ring. And I always enjoy reminding Gary that I was at the Cubs series when he had 2 walk-offs in back-to-back games, including a grand slam that beat the Cubs on ESPN Sunday Night Baseball. And that's a fond memory for him as well. But he pulled off his World Series ring and said, "Here, try it on," you know. So, you know, you got a chance to see what that hardware feels like. Certainly, it was a lot of fun watching those guys win that title.
Who would you say is the most exciting player that you've had the opportunity to just like hang out with? And how do you get to know these guys? I mean, you were telling me stories about you ran into Mark McGwire and it was like you guys were buddies.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about
that was a first meeting. So
Okay.
that was just the other day before opening day on Wednesday night. I was with another friend of mine from fantasy camp, and we were chatting with Ray Langford. And before we know it, Scott Rowland and Mark McGwire stopped by. They had been visiting with friends in the Lowe's Hotel just across the block. And what a treat that was, and an honor to meet both those guys. Mark walked up to us, stuck his hand out, and said, "My name's Mark," or "Hi, I'm Mark." To which I thought, you know, no kidding. He was the most famous man in America in 1998, so that still brings back a lot of good memories. But very nice, and those guys were very kind and gracious in sharing some of their recollections with us.
When you talk to some of the players out there, I mean, you really were hanging out with a long list of them. You get to know these guys a little bit. I mean, you become friends with them, and you see these guys. You communicate with them outside of the sports and stuff that goes on there. And you get to see them at the actual, you know, in personal life a little bit.
You do, and several of them have stopped up here and check out the view, and a couple they come up usually before or after games. But we've had one or two that watched pieces of games from up here. And you do get to know them better, and you get some questions answered. If you're a lifelong baseball fan, and you always watch these major league games and think, what is this guy thinking? I remember one particular breakfast, and I was sitting next to Bob Forsch, rest in peace. What a delightful person he was. And I'm talking to John Mabry. John was asked, he was just a year or two out of the major leagues at that point. You know, he had just stopped playing. And John was asked, "Do you miss baseball already?" And he said, "Well, I miss the guys. I miss the clubhouse, I miss the guys, but I don't miss standing in the on-deck circle in the top of the ninth inning listening to Hell's Bells, because that's the song the other team's closer comes out to." and I laughed, so did Bob, but laughed. I always wondered what that guy's thinking in the on-deck circle when he's got to listen to that. When somebody like, Enter Sandman is playing and Mariano Rivera is coming out of the bullpen, or Trevor Hoffman in San Diego. But they give you insights into, who they are and how they tick. And Rick Ankiel has been a delight. He's come to a number of fantasy camps, and he was also fresh out of his major league career when he first started coming to fantasy camp. And then in recent years, we've had David Eckstein, David Freese. David is a delight. I mean, he's just a super great guy. He's kind and outgoing with everybody, and a humble guy, I think. And what a legacy that he has for the rest of his life. He'll forever be a hero.
Yeah, well, I mean, St. Louis Hall of Fame for sure. Just as somebody, you talk. What are the odds that somebody has to ever do what he did?
Right. Yeah. Grow up here, be a Cardinals fan, and then bring them back with not one hit, but two big hits that keep them in a World Series they eventually win. Game 6 is one of the most historical games in World Series history. And it's hard to imagine a game will supplant that anytime soon. Certainly not in Cardinals fans' minds.
Well, when you talk about some of the most exciting events that have happened in the history of sports, I mean, it seems to me when you have a game 6, the game is on the line, you've got 2 outs, you've got 2 strikes.
Yeah, against a very tough closer.
Yes, and I mean, just
guy throwing 99, 100 miles an hour. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the odds? I mean, just all of that came together, and then to come back again. What was it, the 11th inning?
11th inning, I believe,
So
and he
that was
hit
the
the
bottom
walk-off. Well, they had
talk about that
two
memory.
leads.
Yeah.
That was 2 leads. You remember that we
Yeah,
gave,
Hamilton
hit a 2-run home run
to take the lead, and they were down again.
Yeah.
They came back and tied it, and then
They
won
tied
it.
it.
Was it the 10th?
They
And then
tied
won
it in the
11th.
10th, and they won it in the 11th with Freese's home run.
Talk about that memory in your mind. What that was like.
It was stunning because, like most Cardinal fans and the players, according to Tony La Russa, he had reminded the players in the 9th inning, guys, don't forget we want to thank the fans for all their support. If this stays like it is, and not that he was giving up, and that team just had so much resilience to it. And I mean, they literally fought down to the last strike. But that was a shocking turn of events. It really was. And I mean, when the ball went over, hit the right field wall that Freese hit in the 9th inning, I was like, I can't even believe I'm seeing this. And then when he came up again in the 11th and hit the solo home run, the stadium almost shook off its foundations. I'm sure you were here for that.
I was. Well,
Yeah.
I will tell you a fun tidbit about that with regard to my memory too. As a matter of just being there, I had to get connected and I had to get into the game and did my own thing back like that. Everybody thinks I get free tickets to everything, and I get a lot of free tickets and I get a lot of sponsored tickets, but I don't get free tickets to the World Series.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a first level seat down the right field or left field line. But as a matter of just doing what I do and going around the stadium, I did my thing, and I ended up in the bleachers. But a buddy of mine called me. He says, "Hey, a bunch of us are up here on the second level." So I was downgrading a little bit, but it was still fun. I was up with my buddies, and I ended up right next to a Rangers fan. And God have it, this foul ball comes flying up, and it hits the guy. It would have hit him in the chest, except he did put his hand up, and it bounced around, and he picked it up. All I had to do, if I wanted to be the a selfish fan, was to reach over and grab that. I'm a ball player. I could have probably easily catch with my left hand. Even with the rings on, it might hurt for a second, but it won't hurt for long. It would have been worth it, but I didn't. And I think my joke is I've set up the good karma then, because as I let him have that ball, I say let him have the ball. It was his ball. He should have got it, but I didn't contend that. And I looked at him, and I even streamed him. It's part of the video. It's out there. You guys have seen this. And I said, "Hey man, what's that like getting that baseball? Hey, Rangers, cool, World Series." And he's like, "Yeah, man, pretty cool." David Freese comes up to the plate. This is the second time, and my buddy, this another guy, saw me. He says, "Cowboy, you called that shot?" I'm like, "I did?" And he goes, "Go back and watch your video." It's been watched like 60,000 times now on my little YouTube. I brought a little high-def camera back in 2011, right? This is 12 years ago now. And I said, "If you recall, Mr. Freese hit a triple to tie it up, bottom of the 9th. So maybe do it again or put it over the fence and call it a night."
Yeah.
And God would have it 4 pitches later, and everybody just goes nuts. There's people that took my video and embedded it and put it into their montage of all this stuff. And I was just lucky to be there, lucky to be part of that, and lucky to be right there when all that happened. But my other point was that I had that ball. I would have been in center field where that guy got David Freese's home run, but that would have changed everything, right? If I'd have been, anything happened any differently, I'll just take it the way it is. That guy got himself a $250,000 baseball, I think, or whatever he ended up getting. Tell me about your Cardinals memories, and then tell me about your memories historically. David has so much knowledge about the history of the Cardinals, going back into all the World Series, Stan Musial. Tell me some of the most exciting things. But talk about this last World Series and go back from there, if you would.
Well, you mean the last World Series of last season,
well, whatever you'd like to get into. But that was the 2011 was the last time we won it. We were in 13.
We were in 13.
But give me some of the most historical stuff you remember.
So there's so much. If we're talking about World Series, there's so much great history, not just Cardinals history, but baseball history, wrapped up into the World Series. One of my favorite World Series for its historical interest and just a fascinating series of events is the 1934 World Series, the Gas House Gang that played the Detroit Tigers, took them 7-1. That actually was two games, 1, 2, and 6, 7 in Detroit. 3, 4, and 5 were here in the old stadium, a few miles up the road there. But that's a fascinating. That's actually a lot of people don't know. Game 4 here in St. Louis was the first time that Take Me Out to the Ball Game was ever played in a World Series game in baseball history. Was in Game 4 here in St. Louis of the 1934 World Series. But there's some great stories from that series. One particular one that is so memorable. in one of the games here in St. Louis, Dizzy Dean, who was Dizzy and Paul Dean were the two stars, pitching stars of that team, the 34 Cardinals. They were great athletes. Dizzy was a fast runner, so he was inserted, I believe, as a pinch runner in one of those games. He wasn't pitching.
I remember this story. Yeah.
Yes, and
You told me this. This is a great story.
A ground ball was hit by the next Cardinal, and the Tigers threw to second, got Dean out, and on the relay to first, the thrown ball hit Dizzy Dean right in the forehead, knocked him out cold on the baseline.
Wow.
And they actually had to come out and revive him. He was unconscious for a few seconds there on the field. So they helped him off the field, and of course they're very concerned because they're expecting him to pitch a couple of more games in the series. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or its predecessor, I'm not sure exactly when they changed the name of the paper to its present day name, but front page headlines the next day: X-rays of Dean's head reveal nothing.
X-rays of Dean's head reveal nothing. That is a famous quote that I've got from my father too. They told me about that years afterwards, but he would quote that all the time and talk about, you be careful what they say about you in the newspaper. They might report the truth, kind of thing.
Right.
X-ray of his head revealed there was nothing there. But Dizzy was quite the character too.
He was.
Talk to me about the history, about what you know about Dizzy.
So, Dizzy famously predicted that he and his brother were going to win 45 games before the season. He is still the last National League pitcher to win 30 games in a season with that 34 performance. And actually, Dizzy and Paul exceeded Dizzy's preseason prediction because I believe they ended up winning 49 games between the two of them.
That's insane.
Paul was a 20-game winner, and then Dizzy had his 30. So they were, our Dizzy won 19, so I believe they won 49 if my memory serves. But they actually won several games over what Dizzy had predicted, and people kind of, took that as, of course he said, it ain't bragging if you can back it up or if you can do it.
That's true.
But another great story from that World Series took place in Game 7 back in Detroit. The series had gotten pretty hostile in terms of, the back and forth between the teams, because the Tigers, they had quite a rambunctious unit as well, and some memorable players, as well as a rambunctious fan group up there. And so actually the police had to put protection around the Cardinals hotel when they came back for Game 6 and 7. That's true. But in Game 7, famously, the Cardinals blew the game open in the middle to late innings. I think they had a really big inning and made it like 7-1 or whatever, and kind of put the game out of reach. Well, in those middle innings, or in that big inning, Joe Medwick, our all-star left fielder, had slid hard into third base. And I believe the Tigers' third baseman, his name was Owen, slid hard and spiked him. It said it wasn't intentional, but it was just a hard baseball play. And this came after all these runs had come in. And the Tigers fans are seeing their World Series hopes fly away. And so he goes out to his position in left field for the bottom of the inning. And I believe this is in the bottom of the 7th. And Tigers fans start throwing garbage onto the field of every type, manner, bananas and milk cartons and all kinds, including some garbage that you wouldn't necessarily think people would have in the seats in a baseball stadium. And so this Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner, actually stopped the game with the umpires and had Medwick removed for his own safety. The Cardinals protested, said, this isn't our fault. They said, we're not going to finish this game if he's in the game. We got to, sorry guys. And so they actually ejected him from the game. After the game, the press asked Medwick about all this series of events. He thought for a moment and said, well, I understood why they threw the garbage onto the field. I just couldn't figure out why they brought it to the ballpark in the first place.
Some of those yogiism type euphemisms, those are funny.
Yes, and the Cardinals have plenty of those in their history as well.
Well, let's go through a little bit more of the historical stuff, and then we'll come up
Sure.
to modern times if you want. Because again, David here knows so much about the Cardinals' history. It was astounding to me. And I'm like, not only do you have an incredible place that you have to stay and watch Cardinal games and be across the street, but you have so much knowledge. And I guess it kind of coincides with your background with your book and visiting 420 parks around it. We're talking about
Historical and natural parks.
natural
So
parks,
that's,
but not baseball parks. And you've
no,
done
no.
that too.
But I've done that too.
and
So
been
I-
almost
I-
every park except for a couple of the new ones.
Right, so 36 different major league stadiums. I've seen at least one, but in most cases, or at least one series in all the major league cities. And then I'm only lacking in the current parks because the two of them had turned over by the time I finished up. I'm only lacking Truist Field in Atlanta and the new park in Texas, which just saw action in 2020. And the Cardinals play there in early June, so I'm hoping to notch this one. And we play Atlanta in early September, so maybe I can get both of those in. It's really been a great experience. So I've combined the two. I've gone to national parks, historical sites, and all these different places, and baseball games in the same trip, trying to loop them in together. And what I find about going to games in other stadiums is baseball fans, no matter which team they root for, they all go through similar experiences because there's so many ups and downs in this sport. It's a humbling sport. You know, people talk about all the time how even the very best hitters that played the game fail almost 70% of the time. And it's a sport with a lot of frustration built into it and unexpected occurrences, events. One of the historical things that I'd just like to mention, because it's another story I love, is it's not from Cardinals history, but from Browns history. And for those who've read the great book, The Spirit of St. Louis, which is about baseball history in St. Louis, covers the Cardinals and the Browns, they'll recognize the story. This is, of course, the famous story of Bill Veeck, who was then in charge of the Browns, and Eddie Goodell, the midget that he signed for a one-day contract to come up and take one at bat. It was a promotional stunt. The Browns were mired in last place, as they were for a lot of years. And, there's a joke that they had the metal plates in the old scoreboard in Sportsman's Park with the team name on them for the standings. And the Browns had a win streak and moved out of last place one season, and they had a hard time getting the St. Louis off the bottom of the standings because it had rusted into the standings, into the scoreboard. But anyway, so Veeck goes and finds Goodell. The book tells all the story of how that happened, how he sought him out. I think he recruited a talent agency or contacted somebody who would actually work with people like Goodell. So he found Goodell, talked to him, or had somebody talk to him, had him come down here, didn't tell anybody but his closest associate what he had in mind. Then when Goodell got to the ballpark, of course, famously, Bill DeWitt Jr., his uniform, he had a bat boy size uniform, which Goodell wore, but with the number, what was it, 1/8 or whatever, stitched into the back.
Right.
But Veeck did warn a photographer that was sitting pointed at home plate so he'd get a good photo of it. And that's the famous picture that everybody knows of Eddie Goodell standing up at the bat. But what the best part of the story is, Veeck had his assistant with him when he talked to Goodell, gave him the uniform, basically locked him in a closet until the fourth inning, I believe it was, whenever he came out for his appearance.
Okay.
And then let the manager in on it and said, you're going to pinch hit for this guy in the lineup, and out comes Goodell. But he warned Goodell, he said, so my friend here was a sniper in this World War II era.
Right.
My friend was a sniper in the Marines, and he's a sharpshooter, and he doesn't miss. He's going to be on the roof of the stadium with his rifle. He's going to have you scoped in, and if you swing at a pitch, he'll shoot you. He actually told Goodell this, and Goodell affirmed this later, this part of the story.
I hadn't heard this part of the story.
And right before he locked him in the closet, where he was to wait for his at-bat, he said, the last thing he said, and remember, if you swing, he'll shoot you.
probably not really going to happen.
No, but he left that in mind. I think he wanted to emphasize he was supposed to take a walk.
Yeah, well, it was a very. I mean, I never knew the whole story about that. I thought it was a matter of, hey, and I was always curious as to how did he end up on the roster? I mean, you can't just pull somebody out of the crowd, but they put him on the roster for the one day.
One day there was a glitch in the MLB rules at the time about players, and you could do a one-day contract or a contract without clearing it through the league office. And at that time, when he did that, they corrected that loophole. So after that, they didn't want anybody to try something like that again. So they made sure that as I understand, that all the contracts then went through the league office, and they weren't, going to bring any more performers up.
And that was Bill Veeck back in the day. And Bill Veeck was known for doing all kinds of interesting stuff.
Well, the disco demolition in Chicago with the White Sox, yeah.
I remember he was an owner of the White Sox, and he had them wearing softball shorts. Shorts at one point, right?
Those horrid uniforms.
So,
one of the worst uniforms in the history of baseball.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about Bill Veeck. And I didn't know how much of his history there was here in St. Louis.
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, that's, as I understand, that's really where he got heavily enmeshed in baseball. And of course, the rest of his life would be spent in and around the sport. And so, yeah, he was with the Browns until they left for Baltimore. And then I'm not sure all of his stops, because I don't believe he went directly to the White Sox, but that's where he ended up. And then he's famously known for the disco demolition debacle.
What is the disco demolition debacle?
So that was a doubleheader.
Disco demolition.
I think it was in '79, late '70s. Might have slipped into the early '80s, but there was a counter movement for those of us who were alive then. And remember, disco kind of wore thin with a lot of people, especially rock fans and even country fans. If you weren't into the dance scene, you were kind of fed up with listening to the Bee Gees and every song on the radio. So he decided to take advantage of that with a White Sox doubleheader and invited all the fans to bring their disco records to the game.
Oh, wow.
And between the games, they were going to put them all in a pile and blow them up. and
Bill Veeck.
And what happened instead was chaos. People ran onto the field between the games, and a big fire. They threw all these records in, and the records ended up scattered all across the field. And in the middle of the diamond, there was a fire going on where they were trying to burn these records, and they had to actually postpone the second game of the doubleheader. They didn't play it because the field was just destroyed.
This is the craziness of so there's some historical stuff that's happened within baseball that most people it's kind of, I don't know if it's lost, but it hasn't been remembered in so long.
Yeah, it's abstract, like all those things in '34. I didn't know until I read about that. One of those things is actually in the book companion, the anecdote about Dizzy Dean and getting hit in the head. That's in the book companion for Ken Burns' baseball series. It tells that story, and it highlights the Gas House Gang as being one of the most colorful teams in the history of Major League Baseball.
Tell me a little bit about the history of the Gas House Gang. Most people they've heard the name before. We know those guys, they used to do the little flip and just get in a little circle and then flip the ball to each other. But outside of that, what was
as I understand, they got the nickname by they were a gritty team. They dove for a lot of balls in the field. They stole bases. They slid a lot on the base paths. There was a fast, very athletic team. But they would get pretty dirty over the course of a game. And, the laundry wasn't quite as good then as it is today.
Right.
So over the course of the season, their uniforms sort of carried some of that dirt and then they would get dirty pretty quickly as the game started. So I believe somebody made the comment, a reporter or somebody in another city, that, hey, man, these guys look like they just got off work at the Gas House. And I believe that's how they got that nickname. Somebody might correct me on that, but I think it was their appearance and the fact they were always so gritty. But it was the character of the team. And it turned out, he was a championship character of a team.
Well, if you look at the history of the Cardinals, a lot of their most exciting years were early on. Most of their championships, they went through almost all the 50s and the 60s. with nothing, right? And then
Well,
70,
60s, we had great teams. So 64.
oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Mid 60s.
and
It was the
67.
70s. Yeah, late 60s. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got 64,
70s.
67, also 66, but they lost, I guess.
No, 67, we won in 7 against the Red Sox. And
66?
extended there. And then, no, 60, it was 68.
68.
That's
okay.
when we lost in 7 to the Tigers. So they got even for the
There you go.
34
So here's your
series.
historian, everybody knows.
Yeah, and then, of course, then we went one up on them with the
But the 70s, we
06.
didn't have any.
Yes, the 70s was a struggling, and you had dominant teams. You had the Oakland A's that won multiple titles, early part of that, and then the Big Red Machine and the National League. They were unstoppable. And you look at all the Hall of Famers on that team. Goodness gracious! I mean, what a lineup they had, and they had the pitching to go with it. So yeah, it's no wonder that they won a couple of World Series in a row. They actually unseated the A's with their dynasty early in the decade. But yeah, the Cardinals were kind of on the outside looking in the 70s, despite the fact they had some great players. And, that was, of course, Lou Brock's heyday when he was setting the records and getting his 3,000th hit and all the career stolen base records. Those were exciting teams. But it would take Whitey Herzog that would really bring all that together and give us an identity that we carried through the 80s. Speaking of interesting people that you meet at fantasy camp, Whitey Herzog is a treasure. He's in his 90s now, and his mind is still sharp as a tack. He can sit down and tell you stories where he talks about a pitch-by-pitch rundown of some event that took place in a game he managed in 1978 with Kansas City, and talk about how, and it's a very entertaining story, and everybody that I know that is aware of what he's at, takes him for his word, that it's accurate. It all checks out if you go look. How he can remember all those things after all these years is remarkable. He has an extraordinary baseball mind.
Well, I was going to say the 80s are the most exciting years in terms of my existence. Yeah. I was born in 1972, everybody. By now, a lot of people saw we celebrated our 50th birthday. I made it on ESPN for my 50th birthday. Awesome. They were following me around the park. It was kind of fun. I didn't ask for that. They just thought it was entertaining. But from 72 to 82, 82 was the first time that they actually had any real existence in the playoffs. I guess. Yeah. Did they make it in the playoffs at all in the 70s? I don't remember.
No, but I don't believe they did.
Not even make the playoffs.
Yeah.
But 82, they finally kicked it in. Whitey Herzog came over. He had been coaching for the Royals. Is that correct? And then signed a contract to be the coach and general manager for the Cardinals. And wow, they just turned it on. That 82 team was amazing. A lot of people think Vince Coleman was part of that team, but he was not part of that team, was he?
No.
But that was Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee, Tommy Herr. Was Oberkfeld the third baseman?
Oberkfeld was the third. Ramsey was a utility player on that team. George Hendrick. Was our first baseman and a great hitter.
Left field, Lonnie Smith.
Lonnie Smith, yes.
And kind of a well-known player throughout those many years, Tito Landrum.
Yes, Tito. Great guy.
Do you know Tito?
I do, yeah.
I've hung out with him. He was in town a couple times, and he and I actually text and chat and talk periodically. He came out and helped us hand out coats to people who were homeless and needed some wear to
He's
put
a
out.
great guy.
And just
great guy.
Really great. And we talk all the time. He's got a great connection. I won't say out loud, but it's with somebody. His family's tied to the NBA. He's one of the best players in the NBA. And I'm just really neat guy. He's got a great background and really is so positive and helpful.
And he won rings with the Cardinals and then I believe with the Orioles.
Yeah, I know he went off to the Orioles to finish up.
Well,
did they win a championship back then? Was that
83?
83. Okay,
so was the next year.
Okay.
So he won back-to-back rings, if my memory serves. And I'm almost positive, he won rings with both teams.
But isn't that interesting how we remember the 82 team so well?
Yes.
And then you got to 85. I guess so, because in 85, boy, that was tough, wasn't it? And then 87, a similar thing.
Yeah.
And then we kind of took a hiatus. Of those? We'll talk a little bit, if you don't mind. Sure. Tell us about the history with regard to 85 versus 87 and some of the caveats that kind of like, for Cardinal fans, it's a little hard to stomach a little bit, but it's just part of the way the world is, and you got to bounce back and overcome hurdles, and we talk about that kind of stuff on the show all the time. Tell me your perspective on those two World Series.
85, we had such a great team that year. We won 100-plus games and I believe 101, and that team blew everybody away in stolen bases, led the major leagues in stolen bases. That was Vince Coleman's rookie year, and he set the rookie record, I believe, for stolen bases in that year. Then he had a lot of guys that hit really well. Tommy Herr, I think, he had over 100 RBI. That was the season he had over 100. But there were so many guys on base, and they could all run. So he was hitting behind Vince Coleman and the rest of them. You know that McGee and McGee that was his MVP year. He had over 350, I believe, that season.
Yeah, he won the batting title. I think it was 351. I think what he finished up with.
Yeah,
and Willie McGee became one of the most influential, powerful, potent. Just generated so much offense and was known for a pretty good glove too. I remember that jumping catch he made right in front of the wall. What game was that?
That was against Milwaukee in '82, his rookie year.
Was that his rookie year?
Yeah, he robbed a home run from the Brewers, and that was a huge play. Because that would have turned that game around. But Willie's another guy, just a really down-to-earth, humble human being, great person to sit down and talk to. Before he started coaching, he's on the coaching staff of the Cardinals.
Yeah, he's assistant coach.
But he did a number of fantasy camps, and so we got to spend some time with him. And to sit down and talk baseball with Willie McGee is truly a delight. And he is a guy where humility is the first thing that you notice. He is just a very genuine. What you see is what you get. A humble type of person. He's great influence for these young guys. So it was wonderful to see the Cardinals bring him, and I'm sure that was one of the things that I believe he's the outfield coach, right? So,
sure. Yeah.
So he helps these
guys.
guys.
Be the outfield coach.
Well, and look at how well we play the outfield now. I mean, we've got some gloves on this team, and having guys like Willie and Ozzie Smith, and these legendary players within the field. Great attitudes. They were champions in life. So that's a great core of people that you want around your team. And something that you get exposed to in fantasy camp, too. So that's been really great to get to know these guys. And,
I have been to one fantasy camp. It was on the field here at Bush, or two.
Okay.
Two of them. They have them here in St. Louis periodically.
They do.
But a couple businesses that I work with will say, hey, Cowboy, we need you to come to this and help us promote and do our little thing. They were kind of sponsors of it. And so I got to do that. But I tell you, it was so cool because you're out there with like Scott Cooper, Ozzie Smith, and then some of the old classic guys too that weren't as well known, but definitely were big key players throughout the history of the Cardinals and in there for those games during the 2000s, especially were exciting because you got guys that they were there in 2004 and 6. And they're back in the 9, I guess. Were they in?
They were in the playoffs.
Contending
we got knocked out by the Dodgers in the division series.
You see, so David here knows everything.
You asked about the 85 versus 87 teams, and that 85, of course, came crashing down around us. We won the first 2 games of that series in Kansas City, and so we were the first team that ended up losing the series after winning the first 2 games on the road.
I didn't know that
in World Series history, but that. If that series were played and went as it did today, of course, with replay, we would have won the World Series because the famous Don Dinkinger call, how he missed that is, and I felt so bad for him after the fact because he was a good major league umpire for so many years, and all anybody remembers, they've done interviews. ESPN has done interviews with him, and he's been in documentaries, and he's like, he didn't know he had blown the call until after the game, and he saw, I believe it was the commissioner or the nationally president, one of the two, and he said, and he has said this in documentaries, said, I got that right, didn't he? He just shook his head and said, no, you didn't. You blew that call, and that turned the whole series, and then Game 7 was a blowout in favor of the Royals. But 87, I think, is even more frustrating. As much as, I've enjoyed Minnesota and people in Minnesota, wonderful people, but Twins fans, that Metrodome was almost a little bit sleazy. We found out years later.
About turning on the turbines?
They were blowing, they had air handlers at the top of the Metrodome, and they could blow in or out. Yeah. And they were turning them on to blow in while the other team was at bat.
Right.
And then, outfielders had a heck of a hard time seeing the ball against the white roof. But you know, that is as it is. That's just part of the field. But to do the air handler thing, you know, that's like the Giants signaling the pitches.
Yeah.
You know,
No, I mean, you're actually controlling the flight of the ball. I mean, literally impacting the distance it could carry. I mean,
you're impacting play in a way that's unfair and different. And remember that season, so that World Series, the home team won every game. Cardinals won the 3 in St. Louis. Minnesota won the 4 in Minnesota. And that they actually had, they won, I believe, 55 games at home. It was an unreal record they had at home. On the road, I think they were 1 under 500. They did not have a winning record on the road. And so that was not just a Cardinals thing. That carried them to a World Series title. The fact that nobody was used to playing in that stadium. So it's a frustrating year for Cardinals fans to see it in like that. Because, again, that was one of Whitey's best teams, those 3 teams.
Well, I'll go back a little bit about the days when in the '85 World Series, and because just to reiterate, I mean, we all know that there was a call that was definitely blown there. Some of you people have probably seen there's pictures on businesses' walls.
Yeah.
I do business consulting and digital marketing stuff, and I'll go into a business and there's pictures of Todd Worrell
catching the
ball, hitting his foot on the bag, clearly in front of the runner.
And the runner is that far away.
Yeah,
I
and it wasn't like
Forge.
blown like by a minute and a half, you know. But it was pretty clear.
Yeah, it was pretty
boom,
clear.
boom. It wasn't boom, boom.
No.
It was an easy call
Yeah.
to make if you whatever was going on there. But my point is that after that, the Cardinals turned over. I mean, they just literally pop foul ball in territory.
Jack Clark missed, which was catchable.
It was completely in playable area. It was foul, but it was playable.
Right in front of the
dugout. And
dugout.
just dropped between the two of them. They look at each other like, I thought you were going to catch it. I thought you were going to catch it. And it's just my point to life is all about how you respond to the errors, the hurdles in life. So rather than, because we're all going to have issues that happen, but what do we do about them so that we can overcome them and not give up? Similar thing with Bartman and the Cardinal, the Cubs and all that stuff. Moises Alou, I'll never forget. He's throwing his glove down and go, "What the heck was this?" But there were still, how many plays after that?
Yes.
But that's where psychologically, baseball has so much that goes through your head.
Yeah.
And how you're positive, and that's where I've been fortunate to overcome a coma. Most people have heard my story about I did that, but I just never stopped, never listened to the doctors who were telling me. And I think that's what we learn most from sports, and especially from baseball.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who don't gather that when there's so much, and they get caught up in life, and then their dog died, and they're like, "Oh, it's the end of the world." I'm like, "Let me tell you a story. I wasn't supposed to be here, and or survive." And I think that's where sports really helps us all to learn that so much. Tell me a little bit about your history with sports, with regard to what you love about baseball. And I want you to talk a little bit more about the book,
Sure,
and and that significance of the hat, and that you wore that everywhere. You mentioned that before, but for our listeners who are coming in late now to our stream, it's going live. We're also recording this, so we might play it back for everybody too.
So I had a chance with my own circumstances and my work career. I lived up in northern Illinois, about 300 miles away from downtown St. Louis. And in 2004, the Cardinals started, I believe it was the first year they did this 27-game season ticket package, which was you could do it one game of every home series, or you could do every Saturday, Sunday game in the home schedule and plus one extra. There are 13 home weekends in each baseball season. So for somebody who was 300 miles away, that was a perfect opportunity for me to watch a lot of games in St. Louis for the first time since I was a kid. When I say a lot of games, maybe I go to one or two, or a few each season with my parents. But that really, I enjoyed that experience so much. And of course, 2004, we go to the World Series. And 2005, we went over 100 games, have an outstanding team. And that experience got me back into baseball as an enjoyment that took my mind off the pressures of work and everything else. And I decided in the course of that with all the travel I was doing for work, I was going to try to see games in all the major league stadiums. And so with work trips and my own volition, I would end up doing that and in the end, make it to all 30 major league cities. And as we said earlier, I'm just missing the 2 new ones in Atlanta and Texas. But it was that experience and how enjoyable that was to see the cities, to talk with the other fans, to explore the stadiums and the team history. There's some great museums and ballparks in other cities. Cincinnati has one just outside of their Great American. The Yankee Stadium have one in the stadium. and walk through that as a walk through baseball history, and part of the lore of their 27 World Championships. But some of the most famous players who've ever played the game. So it was actually going to the baseball games in the stadiums and how much I enjoyed that when I had another turn in my career in about 2012, where I could see that I wasn't going to continue. I wasn't working 60 hours a week anymore. I wasn't going to continue with my career at that point for an indefinite period of time. I had a few years left, and I was going to have to find something else to do. I had scheduled a trip in the midst of that, like the baseball trips, but this one was to see a bunch of national park sites, specifically Civil War battlefields in Eastern Virginia, with my wife. And in the very beginning of that trip, I had a chance to look at a system map of the entire national park system and started reading these names of 400 plus national park sites across the country, realizing I had always thought of myself as fairly well traveled and well read. I didn't know what a quarter or a third of these places were. I had no idea what Chiricahua National Monument was in Arizona, or what was that Colorado National Monument near Grand Junction, Colorado, and on and on and on, including some of the historical ones. So the thought, but I did have some knowledge at least, or had some familiarity with about at least 2/3 of them. They were all places I'd always wanted to see, and most of them I had not seen. I'd seen about 50 at that point. The thought got in my head, well, this thing I did with the baseball stadiums, it was so enjoyable. I wonder if anybody's ever been to all 400 plus National Park Service units. I'm sure somebody's done it. I would find out about a year later that group of people is less than 100 as far as anybody knows that have ever done that.
So remind everybody, you have visited every Major League Baseball park.
Yes, except for the 36 in total, and at least a game, but a series in most cases in every Major League city. But I'm missing Atlanta's new stadium and Texas's.
And it's only because they've recently been built, and you'll be down to see those.
Yes.
I know you said Texas
Texas
later this year,
and maybe Atlanta. That's September. So
Okay.
we can get even with these guys for the sweep we just endured.
Right.
But that was the first thing that I did, where I tried to go around and see one of everything, if you will. And then when I was exposed to the National Park System, my earliest loves, other than baseball, were history and exploring places, including places of natural importance or beauty. We call them America's greatest treasures. These incredible places: Yosemite, Yellowstone, Glacier National Park, Death Valley, Redwood. There are actually 28 different designations, and at present there are 424 National Park Service units across those designations. There's at least one in every one of the 50 states. Then there are several in our Caribbean and Pacific Island territories. But to go to all 400 plus, you've got to go north. You've got to go off the grid. In Alaska, there are 23 National Park Service units. Only 5 are connected to the road system. So you have to get on some Cessnas and go flying into the bush, quite literally. You're north of the Arctic Circle for 6 of those parks. You've got to go to Guam, which is Guam and American Samoa would be the most remote parks. Those are the 2 parks that are on island territories in the Pacific. American Samoa being the only U.S. territory that is south of the equator. But actually, American Samoa is so far away. It's a 5-hour flight due south from Honolulu. So if you fly, 5.5, 6 hours from the West Coast out to Honolulu and Oahu, you've got another 5-hour flight directly south to get across the equator and get to the Samoan Islands. The eastern half of the Samoan Islands are an American territory, and that's where the National Park of American Samoa is. An incredible island chain for both its natural beauty and its culture. One of the oldest Polynesian cultures in the Pacific. So there's lots to see. In Guam and Saipan, which is also an American territory, just 30-minute flight north in the Mariana Islands, you have the only 2 island battlefields where ground combat took place in that horrible warfare that marked the Pacific theater of World War II. Those are the only 2 island battlefields that are now on U.S. territory, is what I meant to say. The other famous ones, Guadalcanal and the others, are in other countries. So you have to go international if you want to see some of those sites. But two of them are represented in the national park system, the battlefields at Guam and in Saipan. Saipan famously was the first of those island battlefields where the U.S. landed on an island with a substantial Japanese civilian population before the war, because it had been a Japanese territory since the turn of the century. And unfortunately, the commanders in the Japanese garrison of about 30,000, 31,000 men on that island, their commanders had told the civilians, 20 to 28,000 people, that it was more honorable to die loyal to the emperor than to surrender to the American forces. So some 8,000 commit suicide after we landed, when it was obvious that the Americans were going to take the island. So that's one of the more tragic stories of World War II. But there's so many around our country.
Well, tell me a little bit about how baseball is tied into the military background, and especially the Cardinals, because we have Cardinal fans around the country.
Yes, and the globe.
And the globe. And
yeah.
Why do you think that is, and what are the biggest contributing factors? I mean, KMOX back in the day?
Absolutely.
And what else do you think is also
so at
a
one
big part
point,
of it?
St. Louis was the westernmost team. So, and it was also the southernmost team until the Braves moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta. So the Braves would pull a lot of fans in the Deep South over to their system as generations turned over. But for years and years, for over half of the last century, the team that people across the Deep South and in the West would root for, and then other places as well, would be the St. Louis Cardinals. That KMOX signal is no small thing, and that was a major, KMOX and their strong signal played a big role in the spread of Cardinal fandom in the early years. Because AM, some people may not know this, because AM radio has been displaced from its former place in sports and broadcasting, but AM signals bounce off the atmosphere at night, and they can carry as much as 1,000 miles when they're at a high wattage. So there were people as far away as London, Ontario, and Virginia that were listening to Cardinal baseball on KMOX at night. And people down in, where there wasn't satellite stations, the actual parent flagship station, KMOX, it wasn't consistent once you got out of their market, but a lot of people could listen to those games at night once the night games became a regular, steady fare in Major League Baseball. So that's spread Cardinal, and then it's a little bit like history. If you have an older relative, father or grandparent, that introduces you to Cardinal baseball when you're young, you're most likely going to grow up a Cardinal fan. It's very, very likely. Certainly, I've also talked to a lot of people, fans of other teams, who have made comments like, well, I grew up in such and such city, so this is my team, but the Cardinals have always been my second favorite team. The only place you don't hear that is in Chicago.
True. That is true.
Not a lot of Cardinal fans in Chicago. But in credit where credit is due, Wrigley Field the Cubs used to air a video that was done by Bill Murray, a Chicago native, the famous comedian and actor,
right,
where he talks about his older brother taking him to Wrigley Field for the first time, and the hair stood up on the back of his neck. The experience. You walk into history. You think Babe Ruth might walk out of the dugout, and this is the old Wrigley Field. This was even before lights for him. Well, my first experience there was in the 90s, and I would have described it exactly like Bill Murray does, and I'm a Cardinals fan. I walked out, and it just so happened that was a really odd game because a fog had come in off Lake Michigan, and it set about the middle of the upper deck, so every batted ball that went up above in height above the upper deck was completely lost to the fielders. So they were having to position themselves for pop-ups and flyouts based on the beginning trajectory of the ball. It was the Cubs playing the Expos. One of the players hit a triple, which was a pop-up to the right fielder, and he never saw it. It went up in the fog and finally landed about 5 feet away from him, and the the guy was a fast runner. He was almost to third base by the time the ball lands next to him. So yeah, Wrigley is just a really special place, and credit to the Cubs for this that renovation they did. They didn't lose the historic character of the park or its basic nature, but they added a lot of amenities with the scoreboards and the modernizing the restrooms and adding some new sections. So they did a really good job with that.
Well, you've hit on a whole lot of great information that I think is interesting for just about anybody. If you're a sports fan, if you're a Cardinal fan, the sun has come out here, everybody. It was a pretty gloomy day earlier.
Now we're bright.
The high school kids are playing down on the field down there, but that is Busch Stadium. You can see there behind us. I might even take our camera here. I'm going to swing it over and take a look down. But yeah, take a look over there, everybody. That is the view you get here from some of the apartments over here at Cardinal Way, and it is pretty amazing. And our camera's trying to figure itself out a little bit there, but it is so neat just to be able to be part of all of the history with the Cardinals and have somebody who knows so much about Cardinal history and sports history, the parks, baseball, and everything that ties into that. Because, well, I mean, what an incredible country we have here, and baseball is such an amazing part of it. I mean, there's a lot of people that argue that the reason baseball exists is to keep us all busy so that we don't get too caught up with all the other things that we might get in trouble doing, or just being inactive and doing whatever they don't want us to do. But baseball really is America's pastime, and something that really has an incredible influence on our culture and our history. With that, I want to show everybody real quickly your website, because this is a great piece of history that you document, and so many people obviously do not get to check out all the different theme parks that are all over the place.